Very first topics that I came across was chemical aerosols that are distributed by airplanes, otherwise known as chemtrails. You can see them with your own eyes, and it's extremely easy to see that they are not condensation trails due to the chemicals staying airborne for hours and not dissipating. Another topic I ran into early on was HAARP, which is a facility that uses ionospheric heaters to tamper with the weather. They now claim that HAARP is no longer in operation, but we'll talk more about that here in a minute. Many talking heads and government-sponsored websites will try their best to keep people from looking into the subject by ridiculing it and acting like it doesn't exist. The funny thing about that is they must have been left out of the loop because this is verifiable public information. Let's start with a 2009 document from the Royal Society called Geoengineering the Climate: Science, Governance, and Uncertainty. This document is loaded with information that Joe Rogan, Mick West, and Bill Nye will deny without any real rebuttal, including this part on page 4 that says, weather modification dates at least back to the 1830s when the proposals of American meteorologist James Pollard Espy to stimulate rain by controlled forest burning led to him becoming feted as the Storm King.
I'd like to welcome you to the Pastor's Chronicles. And this Chronicles is based on the episode Jean-Claude Van Johnson. In this episode, it teaches us something of weather modification, which many people are turning away from and just calling it a conspiracy theories. But is it? Listen, I'm going to tell you something. The government spends millions and countless amounts of money to conceal the truth, whether it's weather modification, the foods you eat, Illuminati's sacrifice, and just a secret society as a whole. They're doing whatever it takes to cover up the truth. But in this Chronicles, I'm going to show you some facts. I'm going to show you facts of that there is a weather control. The governments are using weather modification to control the masses, to kill many people, to depopulate the world, and use it as a weapon towards their enemies, towards countries, poor countries that don't have the type of money and resource and power to cause them to submit to the New World agenda. So I'd like to welcome you to the Pastor's Chronicles. We're going to be looking at this episode, Jean-Claude Van Johnson. And there was some, I'm just looking at something. You know, you want to see a movie, you know, you could basically, you know, sit back and just maintain a look at. But every time you think you're looking at something clear, you wind up finding some predictive programming in it. And then also you got to look at Jean-Claude Van Damme. You know, he's in some really secret top stuff. You know, we're going to see that later. But at the same time, in this movie, this episode, we begin to see something called predictive programming. Now, one thing about predictive programming, predictive programming is actually showing you what they're gonna do in the future things, and they basically, the secret society is basically talking to one another, letting each one know to be prepared for this. And if they play a role in it to continue to keep the people distracted. You know, the whole purpose is a distraction. It is one of the weapons of the enemy, is to keep people distracted. I mean, he's been doing that from day one with lies and cover-ups and stuff like that. So what the devil does is he uses people with beauty and talent to deal with the senses, and people when their senses under control, they worship the very thing or people that have this beauty, and this talent. But in this episode, Jean-Claude Johnson, we've seen some of weather modification, and people, we truly need to understand what's going on. You see, there are plans put into practice. That is, plans are put into practice to push us towards a world order. And you have to open up your eyes one day to see it. Regardless, your eyes are going to be open one day, but it may be too late. So I'm going to show you in this episode what the secret societies are doing and who they use it.
This is the history of human weather modification. During World War II, too many British Air Force pilots were crashing while trying to land in heavy fog so thick, some crews just ditched their planes in the sea and parachuted out rather than landing blind. So scientists came up with a plan to install gasoline pipelines along both sides of the runway and ignite them to create huge rows of flame, which then evaporated suspended fog droplets, allowing the Allied aircraft to locate the airfield and land safely. In 1946, techniques were developed that triggered rain and snowfall in places that wouldn't have gotten any otherwise. This became known as cloud seeding. It works by dispersing dry ice, salt, or silver iodide into clouds to alter their microphysical processes. In the early 60s, the US government began testing cloud seeding on hurricanes to learn if it was possible to weaken them. Rocket canisters of silver iodide were dropped from aircraft into the storm's eye, and gun-like devices mounted on the wings also sprayed the stuff onto the clouds. Initially, the tests seemed to work. Wind speeds were cut, and in some cases, the hurricane eye walls even fell apart. But as observational technology improved and more controls were carried out, the hypothesis was invalidated and the program was cancelled. In its desperation to win the Vietnam War, the Americans turned to weather modification to make it harder for the enemy to move throughout the region by inducing heavy rainfall to muddy or destroy their dirt roads and trails. 47,000 canisters of silver iodide were dropped over North and South Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. Some areas supposedly saw their monsoon period extended by up to 45 days, but just 2 days after the New York Times exposed the program, it was discontinued. Operation Popeye caused the USSR and US to negotiate a ban on the military use of offensive weather modification techniques in 1977. But the treaty didn't stop countries from using cloud seeding against themselves, as the Soviet Union did in 1986 when the Chernobyl nuclear disaster sent fallout into the sky. Civilians on the ground and the Russian pilots who carried out the mission have confirmed that aircraft flew overhead, ejecting a substance into the clouds. This resulted in heavy, black-colored radioactive rain to fall in Belarus instead of onto the Soviet capital, Moscow. Today, 37 countries are operating weather modification programs to enhance rainfall or suppress hail, or both. But nobody does it quite like the Chinese, who established the Bureau of Weather Modification in the 1980s that's now a 37,000 people strong sort of weather national guard, ready at a moment's notice to operate the more than 4,000 rocket launchers, 7,000 anti-aircraft guns, and 30 aircraft to trigger downpours in drier areas that really need the rain. The Bureau's highest profile operation was keeping Beijing's Bird's Nest Stadium dry during the opening ceremony of the 2008 Olympics. The following year, the Bureau dropped 186 doses of silver iodide into a cold front to bring drought-stricken Beijing its earliest snowfall since 1987. A Swiss company took advantage of the United Arab Emirates' desperation to bring rain to its arid lands by building 10-meter-tall electrical towers that produce negatively charged ions that, according to the company, supercharges the formation of rain clouds. But a former chairman at NOAA isn't buying it, saying, quote, "This method is inherently incapable of producing clouds out of thin air," end quote.
I just want to take a second to give you a little information about predictive programming in movies. predictive program is a subtle form of psychological conditioning provided by the media to prepare the public with a planned societal change to be implemented. So when these changes are put through, okay, the public will already be familiarized with them and will accept them as a natural progression.
It's the towers! They're falling!
1963, Wonder Woman comic book cover. 1970, 30 Seconds Over New York, book by Robert Bacard. 1973, Godzilla vs. Megalon, movie poster. 1973, Superman comic. 1975, Cracked magazine cover. 1976, 9/11, a book by Thomas Chastain. 1976, Sesame Street magazine cover. 1976, Spidey Super Stories comic book cover. 1978, Super Friends TV show, the episode entitled Monolith of Evil. 1978, Dr. John, City Lights album cover. 1979, Meteor.
So basically, predictive programming is basically a veiled form of mass manipulation or mind control, courtesy from the puppet masters. And so most times when people see these subliminal messages in the movies, when things actually happen, it won't be too much of a hassle. Even like the Las Vegas shooting, you haven't heard nothing about that since, have you? It's supposed to be a tremendous tragic thing. You hearing nothing about that. See, they're preparing you for a slaughter that will happen in this world. And so people are so programmed that when it happens, they ain't gonna rise up against it. So that's the basically sum up of predictive programming.
1985, G.I. Joe, episode 46.
You just stand right there, Sonny. Look straight ahead and hold still while we scan you.
Hey! Transaction approved. Subject's retinal scan matches no known dissident, subversive, or enemy of state on file. Have a nice day.
Hey! Come back here! This money ain't no good! It's US dollars! Absolutely worthless!
1986, Daredevil comic book cover. 1986, Real Ghostbusters, Season 1, Episode 12. 1986, Dream Machine.
There's